Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, July 25th, 2019. My understanding is that nothing happened yesterday of any consequence, and so we could just go straight into reading about Jeffrey Epstein, who apparently was found injured this morning. So, duly noted. It's supposed. I don't know whether it was supposed to be. It's not terrible injuries, but he was apparently found lying on the ground in the fetal position in his jail cell with injuries to his neck, for which I guess people are supposed to feel a certain way. I am not certain what to tell you how to feel. So duly noted. The man's been injured. Okay. There you have it. Actually, some indication that the injuries may have been from another prisoner. They may have been staged in order to support his petition to be moved from this facility to one that was, say, private and under his control and would allow him to leave 12 to 16 hours a day to hang out in his office, which is fully stocked with naked pictures of his victims. So I don't really know. Not sure how to take that one. But noted for the record. Thanks very much, Mr. Epstein. Thank you for letting us know. Daily Coast Radio is live now. We are told by Bill in Portland, Maine, who probably also was lying in the fetal position on the ground this morning, but thankfully with no injuries. Just sort of something he likes to do, and, we don't make judgment about that here. Daily Coast Radio is live now. Instead of wasting time discussing the tone and optics of the Mueller hearings, Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. We'll talk about, it's good to know what I'm going to do. We'll talk about what really mattered yesterday. Mueller didn't wear a flag pin, proving he's part of the deep state. And I think that's about as good an analysis as I have seen from the punditry about what was going on yesterday. Greg Dworkin hopefully will be with us because he actually got to watch some of this. As you know, he was watching intently during our show yesterday, and so he actually knows what's going on. And I had to not only wrap things up or handle the show while the hearings were ongoing, but wrap things up relatively quickly. I really didn't get much of a chance to see things as they were happening yesterday. By the time I was actually free to turn on the television, they are actually just finishing the hearings in the morning, and it was some time before they began the afternoon hearings in the Intelligence Committee, at which point I had to go. And then I totally missed, this is maybe the more important part, the press conference afterwards with Nancy Pelosi and Elijah Cummings and Jerry Nadler. And I really am going to have to lean on news reports and firsthand accounts, I guess, from those who watched it on television. That counts as a firsthand account these days. And catch up on things. By all indications, not all indications, because everybody sees things differently, of course. But there were varying reports, just as there were out of the hearings, about the press conference afterwards. Was it Nancy Pelosi continuing to insist that impeachment just wasn't really likely going to happen? Was it Nancy Pelosi saying in her Nancy Pelosi way, okay, I see that there's some inevitability to this, but we're going to continue to proceed methodically? Apparently, that too, in the eye of the beholder. Speaking of the beholder, the president this morning, not yet started, I don't think, on his rage tweeting, but he was full of rage yesterday in his reaction to reporters telling him this is what happened in the hearing yesterday, and that set him into a rage. But this morning, apparently, his time is being spent telling us who is coming up on television, and then following up a few minutes later with the tweet that that person who was coming up on television has in fact made it onto the television screen. I don't know whether the president of the United States is a demanding job. I always thought it was, but things are changing these days. This may be the new normal. President Trump making note for all of the country that Mark Levin was going to be on Fox and Friends pretty soon, and he was a great guy. And then 2 minutes later, when Mark Levin showed up on Fox and Friends, the president wanted to let us know also that he was a great guy, and still was 2 minutes after he had told us he was a great guy. So anyway, we have with us Greg Dworkin, who is coming up on Kagro in the Morning and is a great guy. And here he is. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning, but I won't be on Fox and Friends.
Okay, well, you'll be here on Kagro in the Morning. And by the way, I don't know if I have stated it, you're a great guy.
Oh, well, that's lovely.
This is you now on the show.
I think I'll curl up in a fetal position and just lie on the floor.
Idea.
I don't know. By the way, the Jeffrey Epstein thing in terms of what's going on with him and nobody knows, I would only make one minor correction. You made it sound like what he really wanted is to have an office that he can walk in and out of 16 hours a day with pictures of his victims. But in fact, what he wants is an office with his victims.
Oh, yes. That could be. He can walk in and out of 24 hours a day.
Yeah. So, I mean, whatever's happening with him is unclear. But sure, I'm convinced he doesn't want to be in prison. So what? Too bad. Should have thought of that. And we'll see what comes out of that. More importantly about Jeffrey Epstein is the 2,000 some odd pages of court material that's supposed to be released in the next week. And presumably naming names.
The names? Okay, excellent. I think we ought to get those.
Be it Wall Street, politics, whatever. So we'll see what's there. In terms of the Mueller hearings yesterday, it was a pretty interesting day. I saw about, I would say, between 60 and 70% of the hearings.
That is a good number.
But if you don't want to watch the whole thing or relive it, there's really only two things you need to do. For the morning session, look at Jerry Nadler's questioning, and for the afternoon session, look at Adam Schiff's questioning. And it was quite interesting watching the pundits watching the hearings because, of course, everybody got what they wanted out of it. The famous Chuck Todd. A lot of data here, but, of course, the optics are terrible for Democrats.
Yes, I did manage to actually see that.
I mean, it's hard not to see that because it was repeated ad nauseum.
I saw it
as an example of everything that's wrong with media. But let me give you some.
The one thing I saw, I was very disappointed.
Yeah, well, I wasn't disappointed because you didn't expect anything else. And I wasn't that disappointed from the hearings because I didn't expect anything else either, I have to say. I wasn't looking for yesterday to be the turning point for impeachment. If impeachment happens, and it still might, then it's going to be a slow roll. Nancy Pelosi, after the hearings, got plenty of pushback from her own caucus. She has her own course, as Amanda will be glad to tell you, that she wants to follow. But, we'll see over the next day or two if there's a trickle of more Democrats that want to do something about it. Here's what the New York Times says.
So far, yeah.
What we learned from Mueller's 7 hours on Capitol Hill, testimony by Robert Mueller, the former special counsel, mostly reiterated the findings of his investigation into Russian election interference. Republicans and Democrats sparred over his conclusions, but under questioning, he had his moments.
Okay.
And the main thing is that he warned of Russian sabotage, but it was pretty clear with Nadler that he did not exonerate Trump. And he was pretty clear with Adam Schiff that there was a whole lot going on, that this wasn't a witch hunt and there was a lot to investigate.
Yeah, the chairs got the best shots in, and the chairs are the ones who, by the way, have the most command of those staff attorneys who work pretty much directly for them. Where people have theorized that staff attorneys would do better questioning, they wrote the questions for the chairman.
You know what? It would have been fine if the chairs just did it, and it didn't have to be 7 hours. It could have been an hour with each of the chairs going for a half hour and nobody else. It would have been fine, but that's not how they did it. The Times also described it as the blockbuster that wasn't. And there were comments about Mueller showing his age, little ageism there. That was certainly gleefully passed around by the Republicans. It was pretty relevant. The Washington Post, which is the better newspaper for coverage these days, Mueller pushes back in a testimony unlikely to change political dynamic is their main headline, and that's about right.
Okay.
Former special counsel points to foreign interference, offers some sharp criticism of Trump, which was true. Democrats now have one option to end Trump's presidency, the 2020 election. The Mueller testimony didn't deliver the spark the Democrats wanted. That puts the onus on House leaders and heightens the stakes for next year's presidential election. but that was always going to be true. Mueller's final day on the national stage was a halting, faltering performance. One of Washington's last respected symbols of bipartisanship repeatedly stumbled before divided House committees. In other words, he was fine, but his testimony wasn't made for TV.
Oh, well, they should have made it for TV.
So they were very upset because it wasn't made for TV.
But people like TV, as it turns out, including the President of the United States.
Yeah, so that's also true of the political reporters that are following this. And they've become accustomed to a certain pace and a certain way of doing things. And Mueller wasn't playing along from the flag pin to his answers.
Can't believe it.
So they were just like really annoyed. I have all these cameras in here and you're not giving us stuff. Well, there's a couple of sound bites and you'll just have to do the editing. But he's not here to make you happy.
Yes. Well, different era kind of guy, I guess.
Right. Different era kind of guy.
So I think he knows about television.
Yeah, a little. I mean, and it's his 90th time there.
Yeah.
And he's probably had it. Now, one thing that hasn't been highlighted enough, which watching the hearings you certainly got a flavor for. We started talking about it in the morning in terms of Doug Collins and some of the other Republicans.
Yes.
But this is a piece from Jonathan Bernstein. Worst part of the Mueller hearings? Republicans' conspiracy theories. There's nothing wrong with defending the president during a scandal, but denying reality helps no one. And there were parts of the hearing where people would bring stuff up, and you'd listen to it and go, what the heck are they talking about? To the point where I think there was a Vox-plainer on what goes on Fox News, and you have to read this in order to understand what the questions were. And I think Mueller was pretty much bemused by it because he doesn't watch Fox News. And that was probably true for the rest of us, too, because we didn't really understand a lot of the questions. So, but that's what Bernstein is referring to. And he says there's nothing wrong with politicians defending a president of the same party during a scandal. It's their job, in fact, to point out where evidence is weak, conclusions assume too much, or stories have holes in them.
Okay.
That's a fair read.
Yeah,
Nor is it a problem when they try to place a scandal in context, as is often the case. A media frenzy or overeager out party, that's us, has exaggerated the importance of some instances of wrongdoing. Many Republicans played that role during Watergate, and while they were burned by a president who couldn't be trusted, historians have been relatively kind to them.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, what did he know and when did he know it?
Yes. And then they meant he. And
they meant Nixon,
right.
And that was Howard Baker. And, how come you don't just say, well, but the guy was a crook. What was wrong with you? Why is he not defending it? Bernstein's right. That's not the way they look at it. He was just doing his job. But that's not what happened Wednesday. Instead of reading carefully into the evidence and finding contradictions or loose ends, House Republicans largely busied themselves with conspiracy theories. It wasn't Donald Trump and his campaign who welcomed and benefited from Russian interference. It was Hillary Clinton. Never mind what U.S. intelligence agencies and Senate investigators have concluded. Never mind that this reality-denying line of inquiry left lawmakers defending WikiLeaks and Russian agents indicted by Mueller. For these Republicans, it's still supposedly inexplicable that the FBI started investigating in the first place. In their stated conception of things, only partisanship and hatred of the president could explain such an otherwise odd decision to look into the rich web of shady contacts between the Trump campaign and Russians. And yet, those partisan and hateful investigators didn't leak anything about the probe when it would have put Trump's election in jeopardy, didn't indict or recommend impeachment, and didn't rush to testify to Congress about any of it. And with the notable exception of Texas Representative Will Hurd, Republicans showed no interest at all in the national security implications of Russia's interference. And remember, McConnell is still blocking bipartisan legislation to strengthen U.S. defenses against future attacks.
Right. Key part of all of it, and we were reminded of it.
Right? A lot of people, myself included, he says, have been critical of Democratic strategy in pursuing Trump investigation or critical of how Mueller acted. But let's not forget that Republicans, too, have a choice. In this case, they've chosen to act irresponsibly. In doing so, they're continuing to harm the Republic. And that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think so. By the way that piece's headline appears in Skype when you've sent it is entertaining all by itself. all you can see is worst part of the Mueller hearings, Republican So there you go. The rest of the headline doesn't show up. So yeah, if you were looking for the worst part, it was the fact that there were Republicans there. That pretty much
one of the funny things is looking at the pundits is, from unexpected quarters, you find a little bit of wisdom. This is Jonathan Allen from NBC.
That's an unexpected quarter.
He says, I must be watching a different hearing than the rest of the punditry. What I've seen here is Mueller make very clear that he believes the president obstructed justice. That was true in the report, but his testimony went further. It may not be exciting, but it's serious.
Yeah. I guess one of the more frustrating aspects of Mueller's style, and I recognize it, obviously, is he's deliberate because he's talking about things that are kind of complicated in many instances, and there's a lot of nuance to some of his answers. And it's ironic that thing which Republicans and pundits, for some reason, want to latch onto to say, well, he couldn't make his point succinctly. There wasn't a television moment in his points, was him actually bending over backwards still at this point to be as fair as possible to the targets of his investigation, so that you wouldn't be able to criticize his work as biased or partisan in any way. And they, in fact, used his willingness to hedge everything because there's an argument to be made everywhere, and I want to leave it open to make that argument just so you can get some flavor for how strong the case is in some places and how nebulous it might be in others. To use that to pretend that the whole case falls apart is absurd, but of course, that's where we are.
You don't know the difference between a clip and a magazine.
Right, so how could you possibly? Yeah,
it's the same stuff. But what's fascinating about that, and one more Jonathan Allen observation, one thing that gets lost because we've come so accustomed to it is the number of things the president has said to the public that Mueller has said his investigation found were lies. From hoax to having no business dealings with Russia, lying to the public used to hurt presidents. Of course, it doesn't anymore, except for with everybody that's not in his cult.
Right.
Which is why opposition to him is so strong. But again, put this in context.
I will.
Jonathan Allen is talking about the substance of the hearings. Jonathan Bernstein is talking about the fact that the Republicans look like a bunch of crazy anti-vaxxers.
Yes.
And Chuck Todd is making the observation that the optics look terrible for Democrats.
Yes. Although he did also make the observation that the substance was terrific. I mean,
but you have
hilarious.
These crazy nutcase Republicans basically frothing at the mouth, and he's saying the optics look terrible for Democrats.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's right. Good news for John
And
McCain,
I'm trying to think, what are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And actually what the pundits wanted to say but didn't say outright is that this entire hearing was about impeachment, which it wasn't. And therefore, if you didn't get the impeachment moment, which was never going to be there, then it was a failure, which it wasn't, because that's not what the hearing was for.
Okay.
But for those people who wanted it to be, they're saying a totally different thing.
Yes.
Right? And that's why everybody who's looking at it in terms of just the facts, ma'am, do a Joe Friday. Right? Not a revelatory, this is the end of the 1 hour episode, and then we'll tell you how Sherlock Holmes got to the conclusion. It's just the facts, like, give me the facts. The idea there is that with the small sound bites from Nadler and from Adam Schiff, and then with a very good optics news conference with Pelosi and the three chairs bringing in
oh, yes, I forgot Schiff. Right.
Schiff was there, too. But having oversight chair and having judiciary chair and having intelligence committee chair, and clearly the chairs wanted impeachment.
Okay.
That was pretty clear. It was pretty clear Pelosi did.
Even Clint Eastwood's empty chair wanted impeachment.
Right. The news conference was delayed by an hour because they were all meeting in caucus. I guess Pelosi trying to take the temperature of her caucus, and a lot of people pushing back that we really have to do more. And I haven't counted. I know there's at least one Democratic representative who came out for impeachment after the hearing.
Yes.
But it was a sober discussion, and basically, Pelosi made noise about, we're still moving the way we're going to move, and we're going to move in the direction that the caucus takes us. And, I'm not telling people not to push for impeachment if that's what you want to do, but I'm not ready. Mm-hmm. And, we have some of the caucus members saying, I'm more toward impeachment than I was, but I'm not quite there yet. There's a number of people who came out with those sort of statements. That's a Pelosi ally kind of statement. And it's still, as I've said all along, impeachment has its own rhythm. And this neither disrupted it nor changed it. Mm-hmm. If people are going to come to that conclusion, they'll come to that conclusion. If they don't, they don't. And this was not the moment. There are going to be no moments. That ain't how it works, right? Mm-hmm. It's a tide. It's something that's going to happen with its own rhythm. It's not going to be, this is the one moment that changed everything. And people, including Chuck Todd, who keep looking for that, are looking in the wrong place.
Yeah, I guess so. I do wish we could sort of provide that. I could put
sure. I mean, I get that. I mean, and I understand why people want him impeached. I would like to see him impeached. I understand why it's frustrating when it's not happening. But, there's some things you just can't direct.
I guess not. And I'm not certain that they would recognize it when they saw it either. But it is.
No, it's not one of those things that is directed by a single person. That's just not how it works. Interestingly, the newspaper folks were also getting a whole lot of pushback from people I saw yesterday.
Right. Well, they chose to watch it out loud on Twitter with people who could answer them, and that was a huge mistake.
And then they were complaining, Maggie Haberman especially, why do you keep thinking that we're the ones that change public opinion? We just report on what's going on.
Yes. We report, you decide. Well, we're deciding right now in your face.
That's like the New York Times puts up a story about going to St. Clair County in Michigan and only talking to Trump voters who are still supporting him, and make that a big deal, even though it's an area that is not as supportive as it was and not the swing area in Michigan.
Right.
But you put that story out there, and one could get the impression that Trump's support remains very solid everywhere, when in fact it remains solid within his base and really nowhere else. You wouldn't get that from the story. So the idea that the New York Times and other media outlets doesn't change opinion is ridiculous.
Yes, I think most people probably believe it does. And here I'm speaking of people who work at newspapers.
Why are we talking about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason most people go to work for newspapers, actually, is that they know that that's the case and they want to be able to do that.
Well,
I mean, does anybody ever grow up and just say, I just want to tell people what's happening?
Yeah, and whether they pay attention to read my stories or not, I don't really care.
Yeah, I mean, people with senses, able to understand things on their own when they see or observe them, probably need me as a sixth sense to tell them what I saw while they were watching things. That's why I'd like to go into this career.
Right. So let's just put things in perspective a little bit. For example, one could look at the Real Clear Politics or the 538 presidential numbers and find that they really haven't budged one way or the other. Not after his racist tweets, not after yesterday, too early, of course, but I don't think that's going to change much because it hasn't changed in a year and a half. The YouGov poll shows that a generic Democrat beats Trump by 7 points. The Fox News poll that was out yesterday has some kind of interesting things in it when you go and look. Do you feel Trump's recent tweets in which he criticizes four minority Democratic congresswomen and tells them to go back to the countries they came from was an acceptable political attack, or did those tweets cross the line? There's a Fox News poll.
Or good optics.
Right?
Yeah.
Acceptable political attack 27, crossed the line 63. Do you think Donald Trump respects racial minorities? In August of 2017, Fox News respondents thought 41% he does, 56% he doesn't. What's interesting is it's now 34% he does, 57% he doesn't.
Okay. That's
right? Everybody who knew he doesn't, they didn't change their minds. but he's lost a few people who thought he was being respectful.
I guess. Yeah.
You think saying go back to the country you came from is a racist thing to say to a person of color or not? Yes, 56, no 23. No previous questions to compare it to because nobody in the right mind would say such a thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. We don't have a baseline for this.
There is no baseline. George Wallace in 1968.
Do you think standing on the roof of the White House in a chicken suit and screaming out the Constitution backwards is a good thing for a president to do? We don't have any past data on this, but so far here's our answer.
Right. And then another one here from that same Fox News poll.
I don't like the suit. Yeah.
Summary table among registered voters favorable or unfavorable. The 2010 healthcare law, also known as Obamacare, 52% favorable and 43% unfavorable. So it's popular now. You might as well call it the Popular Affordable Care Act. Right?
Sure.
We were always mad when they refused to say that Bush wasn't popular. But Affordable Care Act is popular now. Just keep that in mind. So Donald Trump's at 45, favorable and unfavorable 51. Mueller at 40-35. What's interesting is Nancy Pelosi's 39-50. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is 34-41. So Pelosi's more unpopular than Ocasio-Cortez.
Okay.
Mitch McConnell is 25-47. He leads the unpopularity of all political figures.
Yeah,
Don't forget that when you and the point of my giving you all this Fox News stuff is that no, it's not like Trump is winning on this stuff.
Yeah.
Not.
Well, no.
He's right where he is.
Okay.
It didn't change a thing.
Well,
it's not
what were the optics about then? So, all right, now optics and data must be two different things. I wonder which one's the more important. We can examine that when we come back after these great optics. Primary. Yeah. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with Greg Dworkin to wrap up yesterday, during which nothing happened and there were no optics. But
well, I'll give you a wrap up. This is from Tom Nichols.
All right.
He says Adams' just 5 minutes and Mueller's answers would have been enough for Republicans to impeach and convict any other president before sundown today.
Oh, yeah. Well,
the shift segment, short as it is, you could find it on YouTube, was really quite good.
Yes, and in fact, I saw something circulating today on Twitter saying even just this exchange, which is just a minute, it's almost as if it was designed for being shared on Twitter, sums the whole thing up pretty quickly, and it does, and I don't have it ready to play, but it did. I'm telling you, I swear, it really was. Yeah, right. So.
And then The Hill does have this, Nadler shuts down Republicans' attempt to declare point of order in a bizarre exchange. I do actually have a link to that.
Oh, all right. Sure. Well,
I'm just saying, since we mentioned it, you can put it in on the summary when you do it later.
Okay, we might as well talk about procedure briefly. I mean, they were very brief about it.
Yeah. Anyway, there you have it. So you have a link to it.
Got it.
So Matt Grossman, political scientist on Twitter, starts talking about the Democratic primary and where things stand, and he notes and he's commenting on a 538 piece. And says Kamala Harris has lost about a third of her post-debate bounce, and Biden's regained about 2/5 of his smaller post-debate fall.
Interesting. Okay.
And I have a graph that I put up there from Real Clear Politics so that you can see exactly where they stand. Bernie's basically stayed where he is. It's just that Harris and Warren have risen and therefore matched or passed him, depending upon which poll you're looking at any given time.
I see. Okay.
So Nate Silver says it's worthwhile to be at least a little bit skeptical of rapid news-driven swings in the polls. The funny thing is we don't even see that about Trump anymore. Everybody's already made up their mind.
Yeah.
By contrast, slow and steady gains or losses in the polls, say Warren's gradual improvement over the past few months or Sanders' gradual decline, are often more durable.
Okay.
So Warren's clearly gaining. Sanders has clearly lost ground compared to where he was 5-6 months ago. Mm-hmm. And where Harris actually is kind of tough to tell at this particular point in time. But we got another debate coming up, so we'll see.
Okay. Which color is Harris? I can't tell from this.
Harris is orange, so I said right there at the bottom. Harris is orange and Warren is brown.
Oh, yes, that's right. I thought you did say it. Okay. So it is
just to help you with those little lines.
Yeah, I thought you had said Sanders, but Sanders
is in blue, and he's just basically declined since 6 months ago, but not really dropped dramatically.
When you said Harris was difficult to tell, it's all right. I guess it's because now that I know which
it's difficult to tell where Harris is going to wind up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, she's also kind of caught up in the jumble down at the bottom, not the very bottom, where there's 17 overlapping lines
leading,
from,
and he continues to lead by a significant amount. Okay, for all those people who thought Joe Biden was going to collapse, maybe, but not yet. Overall, he's got about a 29 in the average. Warren's 15, Sanders 15, Harris 12.2, and those are the four. Then there's everybody else.
Yeah, that chart I think illustrates that point nicely. That there's a mess at the bottom where everybody's the same, and then there are 3 or 4 colors that say, "Oh, this must be indicating something other than this mess at the bottom." Who are these people? There's your answer. Okay, so good graphic
I think
representation
that's of interest.
The tiers,
right? G. Elliott Morris says something that certainly would warm Armando's heart. He says, I think you can make a pretty good case that media coverage in the entire 2020 Democratic primary would be very different if the first states to vote were diverse ones like Florida, Texas, New York, and Georgia.
What? That's crazy.
Well, we like that.
Yeah, right. Armando will be in favor of that, and so will people who like democracy.
Right. Adam Serwer throws in his observations from yesterday. Says, Mueller testified the president and his campaign welcomed Russian interference, benefited from it, tried to deflect blame from Russia, then tried to block the investigation. The best newspapers in America are reviewing the hearing like a bad episode of Game of Thrones.
Yes. Well, he needs better optics in his coverage of their coverage of the optics. He needs his famous headline.
That review is just noise. It's going to go away in 24 hours and there'll be a different story.
I am still waiting.
Right.
But it hasn't been 24 hours.
So this is one of those situations where you just look and say the political coverage in this country is really stupid and it hasn't gotten any better in the last 2 years.
That is true.
Now we got a good, clear indication that is still true. Let's move on and see what else is happening.
Yes. Well, Adam should use his most famous headline format and say that the interference is the point, or something like that, and then everyone will understand that it's serious.
As far as the coverage goes, cruelty is the point.
Okay. Yes, the cruelty of the coverage.
The cruelty of the coverage.
Yeah, that's happening. Well, I certainly hope it does look like there's an opportunity to emerge from this fog 24 plus hours later, and
that's what I'm saying.
Look back.
And then you'll get the little snippets that are still left that will circulate.
Yeah.
And, everybody will have their own universe of where they get information. But as we talked about the other day, sometimes it's from family.
Oh, but yeah, don't do that.
And sometimes it's from social media.
I will be interested to see if it does develop that way. It will be very telling if it does. It's beginning to remind me, it's not a great parallel because the mechanism's different, but I like the idea. The outcome is maybe the same. It reminds me a lot of I guess now we're done with this, the use of the snap polling to tell the pundits that there was a good feedback mechanism to tell post-debate pundits that they had missed the point entirely by trying to focus on the dumb things like optics that they usually focus on, and that the rest of the country, we also observed it visually, just as you did. It's just they took in the entirety of the exchange and were able to process the whole thing, whereas you have 10-second clips that you're supposed to analyze, and maybe that's a bad idea. This too could, the country could in fact shake off the punditry again on this one. It would be very interesting to see. Totally different mechanism, and I'm not sure how you would replicate it. And once they found out that snap polls could be used to flush their punditry down the toilet, they stopped doing them, I think.
They stopped doing them, right. It was really, really interesting. And they may stop having, a legal analyst on. Because the legal analyst said, that was a pretty good presentation by Mueller. He pretty much captured all the points. And they're going, oh, no, the optics are terrible. No, actually,
right.
He had this point, he had this point, he had this point.
Right.
That's not what we want to hear. Yeah. We need somebody here who's going to tell us that the substance doesn't matter and the optics are terrible. You're fired. I'm going to book a whole bunch of different people as of now.
That's television news for you, I guess, in a way, right? Speaking as somebody, the legal analyst say, speaking as somebody who knows that Perry Mason isn't what it really looks like in a courtroom, and that an effective case is put on in kind of dry fashion for an audience of people who understand it.
You make the big reveal and the prosecutor always loses.
Right. Then I can tell you that this actually went the way a pretty solid case would go. And they say, no, a solid case has, first of all, there's musical accompaniment, right? That didn't even play once. So maybe it wasn't optics so much as an audio problem. Right. But that's the way a courtroom drama goes, right? And then you throw the briefcase on the table, and the plaintiff in the neck brace turns their head, and the whole case falls apart. I saw that on TV.
Right, and then their head falls off. So, okay. Anyway, that's my segment for today. Don't get too worked about it. One way or the other.
So that's very loud. I'm sorry about that.
It was really dramatic.
Well, that's what we were going for, that television moment here on the radio.
Yeah. Well, you should play that with the description about shutting down the point of order.
Oh, yes. Okay, I can do that.
Clearly the most dramatic moment of the entire day.
Yes.
Which lasted about 8 seconds.
Okay. Well, I'll use all the sound effects I have to stretch that 8 seconds out into something dramatic. 22 minutes, I guess, and then a commercial break.
Right, exactly right. So, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, very good. Enjoy your vacation. Tell them to cool things down there again in Alaska so that we can survive as a planet.
Yeah, it'd be nice if the whole place didn't melt.
Yeah, pretty good.
Also, I'd really like not to have a volcanic explosion right under me when I'm there. But we'll see. I don't have much control.
You made it through Iceland. That. You can make it through this too.
Yeah, well, I'll call Nancy Pelosi because apparently she runs everything.
Yes. Oh, right. Also, you might. Maybe you don't want to try the New York Times. They don't believe they can do it.
Yeah. Well. Okay. The optics would be terrible.
Well, bring back some good optics for us on your camera, I guess.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it and tease everyone with them. Thank you. You do the same. Enjoy things, and we'll suffer all the more without you. All right. What are we going to do? We should shut down. We should take a vacation. I'm going to Alaska. I'm going to show up, and I'm going to knock on your hotel room door, unless you're cruising on a ship, in which case, I don't know. Well, that's a great way to see Alaska, but I don't know. These days, the odds on cruise ships, bring some Imodium, I guess, is my best advice. All right. Let's see. There was this point of order, which I guess we were going to try and illustrate with some dramatic music. We have all sorts of things we could be using here. Let's see. All right. Well, we can try this one out here. I brought it up during the break with Greg. I thought he was going to make a larger point of this just because he loves these interesting procedural stories. This one is interesting in how uninteresting it actually was because it was shut down quickly and efficiently. But I think he actually mentioned yesterday that the usual brouhaha that breaks out just briefly at the beginning of almost every one of these relatively important hearings run by Democrats in the House is punctuated by some sort of procedural objection from Republicans, just basically a let's just throw whatever we have against the wall and see if anything sticks kind of an attempt to, well, maybe we can derail these hearings that are going to be terribly embarrassing to us. And the answer is no, you really can't. Committees are stacked in favor of the majority for a reason. One of the reasons being that they know that the minority frequently does something like this. And it's just a matter of routine. Getting a hearing started means coming in, banging the gavel, saying the hearing is officially started, and then hearing out a Republican complaint for a minute or two, and then saying, nah, that's not going to work. Sometimes it's self-punctuated by a vote by a stacked committee to shut down the minority, and then you move on. This didn't happen at the beginning, but I know that Greg had noted the absence of that usual bit of, nonsense drama that people make up at the beginning of these things, and that it didn't happen. And I guess so. Therefore, and that's the reason it's interesting to look in on this. It happened elsewhere. It wasn't that it didn't happen at all. It's that it didn't happen at the beginning, and so we will take note of the fact that it did happen and when it did. The Hill's coverage of it is here. Nadler shuts down Republican point of order after impeachment question. A new name to share from the Hill. Morgan Chalfant. I don't know, but welcome to the show there, Morgan. Here's the coverage, and there's a clip that goes with it. I think I'll have to, if I want to play it, I'll have to put it in Pocket and transfer it over to the other computer here. Let's see. All right. So Representative Mike Johnson, a Republican of Louisiana, asked for a point of inquiry, which is, you can make an inquiry and a point. I don't even know if there's really such a thing as a point of inquiry. It's a point of order that you can make that's something that's enforceable. And there's a parliamentary inquiry, which you can ask to sometimes just rhetorically get help from the chair in framing what's going on here. But we do frequently see members confusing the two and say point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman, as opposed to parliamentary inquiry or point of order. And they may or may not. I don't know. It's strange. I don't think there really is an actual procedural thing. The point of inquiry. You can make an inquiry and you can be making a point with your inquiry, and so it's not that there's never any point to making an inquiry. It's just I don't think it's an actual, a parliamentary procedure of any sort. But anyway, it's reported here this way nonetheless, and I can't tell whether that's because I'm wrong and there really is such a thing, or that's what the member said and I'm a reporter and I'm writing that down regardless, and I just don't know the difference or don't care, and neither will my audience. And in fact, you don't, so here we go. Representative Mike Johnson asked for a point of inquiry as former special counsel Robert Mueller's hearing before the House Judiciary Committee dragged past its original end time on Wednesday, a move committee chairman Representative Jerry Nadler quickly dismissed. Okay, so the question put forward here by Mike Johnson is, was the point of this hearing to get Mr. Mueller to recommend impeachment? Johnson asked Nadler. Now, that's a interesting question, perhaps, for some of you. I don't know whether you're interested in the answer, but there wasn't one. This is how neatly you can answer and wrap up on something like this. Well, point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman, was the point of this hearing to get Mr. Mueller to recommend impeachment? And the answer, that is not a fair point of inquiry. That's it. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized, was the next thing that Nadler said, which was to say, I am no longer recognizing you to speak on this question. Your question was dumb, and it wasn't even really a thing. Point of inquiry. What does that mean? Let me see if I can bring it up here. It looks like it's only a 23-second exchange. Can I play it on the air? Let's see. There's going to be an ad first.
We build the wall.
There we go. Foreman Mike, whoever that's supposed to be. That's basically the new Joe the plumber, I guess, pretending he's building the wall. Let's see. Here we are. The clip we need without oh, no, I got to turn the... You know, it's interesting. You got to turn the volume up a second time. They'll turn the volume up for you plenty on the ad, but then you got to turn up the volume again on the substance. All right, let's get to this little clip here.
The gentlelady yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of inquiry over on your left.
There's Mike Johnson.
Was the point of this hearing to get Mr. Mueller to recommend impeachment?
That is not a fair point of inquiry. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, wait
Director Mueller,
Mr. Chairman.
To your
the gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
For coming here, you're a patriot.
There you go. I mean, that's the whole thing. Nope, we got to turn it down here so we get rid of the ad again. But that's the entirety of the exchange. And by the way, not particularly well expressed there by Nadler. I'm sure he was just fumbling for words to say that that's not a fair point of inquiry. It's not a point of inquiry at all. It is an inquiry, but it's not one that you're entitled to interrupt proceedings with. You could have done it on your time. You might have made a point of order saying somehow that the hearings had gotten off track because the focus of the previous questioner's inquiries might have been impeachment, but you would have likely lost that point as well. It's just interesting that every once in a while one of these Republicans thinks that they can interrupt things or get things off track. And, just here illustrating the power of the gavel. The gavel is the one that is the instrument through which you get to tell people, no, you're going to have to shut up now. And the majority on the committee will likely back you up on that. And just functioning in a minority is lousy. But you can do a much better job of it. Let's see. The moment happened after Nadler said that with Mueller's indulgence, he would extend the hearing by roughly 15 minutes to allow all Democrats on the committee to question Mueller. At the time, the last Republican, Johnson, wrapped his closing arguments. 5 members had not yet questioned Mueller. So, all right, I don't know exactly. I mean, maybe the idea here is that Johnson thought that Nadler was extending the hearings so that more Democrats could talk about impeachment or something like that, as opposed to, well, I'm extending things so that more people get to ask their questions, as dumb as that is and as unnecessary as it is. Not sure how he reached that conclusion, but it didn't matter, is the answer. Once again, you can shut these things down pretty quickly. So, all right, moving on from there. Let's see. There are a couple other things that Greg sent our way. And since he'll be gone for an extended period of time, it probably pays to go and check in on those things. And let's see what they are. What's this here? Kyle Kondik on Twitter. All right, let's take a quick look here. What are we looking at? Crystal ball. Okay, Alan Abramowitz with a very early forecast, of the 2020 House and Senate races. Interesting. Okay. Shifting gears. Model gives a surprisingly good outlook for Dems in the Senate, but caveats abound. And boy, when caveats abound, you're really in trouble. Oh, you know what? It occurs to me that the clip of Nadler shutting down the point of, inquiry, as they say, although, did they change the headline here? No, they did. They got it right. In the headline writer knows that there's no such thing as a point of inquiry, and instead says, right, Nadler shuts down a Republican point of order. So that's good news. But we didn't play any of the sound effects, and I had that all ready. Like, all you really had to do was, the only ones, I guess, that I had that were applicable was this one.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
Right. That's really about it. Or Mr. Chairman, I have a point of inquiry. No, well, you're wrong, and that's all there is to it. I guess we could have gone with...
Unacceptable!
But that seems a little over the top. So, okay.
You lose! Good day, sir!
I guess that's it. There we go. All the sound effects I could think of to make that one work. Plus one superfluous sound effect of Armando almost crashing while talking to us on the phone. Because I love to play that one. Don't talk on the phone and drive. Don't appear on this show and drive at the same time, unless you're Armando. We wish you good luck when you do that, but we really do like to hear from you, and sometimes that's the only way we can do it. Just be careful out there. All right. What are the caveats currently abounding, according to the crystal ball, looking at the 2020 House and Senate races? We'll take a look. Let's see, the 2020 congressional elections, a very early forecast because it's 2019. So it's bound to be early. Look, bullet points. Everyone loves those. The key points from this article, Alan Abramowitz gives us here. A forecasting model based on post-war electoral history, along with the president's approval rating and the House generic ballot, points to Democratic gains next fall. And I feel compelled at this point to point out that there is a competing model out there. This one comes from, as we said, the crystal ball. Now, whose crystal ball is that? It's not the actual pundit that actually has the name crystal ball, but Larry Sabato's crystal ball. As I think most of you know, Sabato operates out of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. A competing model is emerging from out of another Virginia university, Christopher Newport University, and Greg has mentioned before, Rachel Bidikoff's got her own predictive model that, what is it that she calls it, a negative partisanship model, essentially a competing model, and it may be, on closer examination, that she's baking much of the same data in, but in different form. But she appears to be approaching things from outside of this more traditional forecasting model, as I say here, based on post-war electoral history, along with the president's approval rating and House generic ballot, et cetera, et cetera. And one of these days we ought to just pick up her model and just read about her methodology a little bit. She's doing a very good, she had a tremendous predictive record for 2018 elections. Based on that, of course, doing what you ought to be doing with a successful model, promoting it for 2020. And we should look into exactly what she's baked into her assumptions. But a battle of predictive modeling among Virginia's public universities, great public universities. This is sort of an interesting thing that has happened here, and no particular reason why it would happen here. It just is. So anyway, we'll save that for another day. Here today, though, looking at the old school predictive model. The model's projection, our second bullet point tells us, won't be finalized until late next summer, and will be based on whatever the president's approval and House generic ballot polling is at that time, which is interesting. Just as a note, okay, this is a preliminary look, and we won't really know what's going to happen next year until it almost is about to happen, at which point we can probably tell you a lot about what people will do because we will ask them and they will tell us. That's a lot less romantic way of putting it, though. The Republicans enjoy some advantages on both the House and Senate map that might allow them to overperform whatever the model's final projection is. That's a cute way of saying Republican gerrymandering will distort not only the predictions our models make, but essentially the will of the people as well. Because we're going to ask people, who are you going to vote for? And they are going to tell us. And then we're going to total that up, and we're going to say, in a democracy, typically speaking, majority rules. However, this third bullet point says in very artful fashion so that they don't lose their funding at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, the Republicans enjoy some advantages on both the House and Senate map that might allow them to overperform whatever the model's final projection is. That is, whatever people say they're going to do and whatever it is that people say they prefer and that they're going to use their franchise to express at the ballot box could be overturned by shenanigans from Republicans, not necessarily changing the votes that are cast, though that's not beyond them, but rather that they are, of course, organizing people along certain lines and in certain groups and within the boundaries of certain voting districts such that it won't matter as much as it should, as much as the assumption that when people vote, they're serious about expressing themselves and that a majority should rule. All of that will go out the window. Anyway, I thought that was a very interesting bullet point to have up at the top. Here's the forecast. Bright and sunny today. Cooler temperatures on their way. All right, this is the wrong forecast. This is with more than 20 Democrats vying for their party's 2020 presidential nomination. A lot of 20s, right? It is understandable that the nation's attention has been focused in recent months on which candidates will emerge from next year's primaries to challenge President Donald Trump in November 2020. Thanks for telling us. But no matter whom the Democrats nominate and no matter who wins the general election, the ability of the next president to carry out his or her policy agenda will depend on which party controls the House of Representatives and Senate in 2021. Even if Trump is reelected, the Democratic House would probably continue to aggressively pursue investigations into allegations of misconduct by the president and his allies. That seems likely. The Democratic Senate would almost certainly mean that most of the president's judicial nominees would be dead on arrival, and many of his executive branch appointments would face tough scrutiny, as if that mattered. On the other hand, a Democratic president would have little or no chance of enacting an ambitious progressive agenda if, of course, the president's party didn't have control of the two chambers, right? So, in order to assess the outlook for the 2020 House and Senate elections, I, not me, but rather Alan Abramowitz, used a forecasting model that provides fairly accurate predictions of swing seats based on 4 factors, and we know what those factors are. Well, we'll get to the prediction part of this after this 1-minute break, and that'll give me a chance to look at it and say, is anything interesting coming of this, and warn you ahead of time. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. And it's a good thing I had a minute to take a quick look at this because, wow, the body of this is serious statistical speak, and there's no way I could adequately convey it to you. But the conclusions are down at the bottom, as conclusions often are. But let's see. I thought I might just take a quick look at the methodology explanation here. In order to assess the outlook for the House and Senate elections, I used a forecasting model that provides fairly accurate predictions. That's good. Of seat swing based on 4 factors. Here they are. The number of seats currently held by the president's party, the president's net approval rating in late August or early September of the election year, the results of the generic ballot polling in late August or early September of the election year, which we don't have yet, neither of these 2 things, and a dummy variable distinguishing midterm elections from presidential elections. A dummy variable. It's really disrespectful of the president, but that's the terminology they're using. That's not what they mean, of course. That is what I guess Armando would call part of the arsenal of secret sauce. A dummy variable distinguishing midterm. In other words, the X factor that makes presidential elections and their results different in kind, in some way, from midterm elections. Based on election outcomes in the post-World War II era, we expect that, even though past results are no prediction of future outcomes. 1, the predictions are, or the expectations are, 1, the more seats the president's party is defending in the current House or Senate, the more seats the president's party should lose. 2, the more popular or unpopular the president, the more seats the president's party should correspondingly gain or lose. Now, this is a very unpopular president, so that's supposed to be a good sign for Democrats. Number 3, the larger the lead or deficit that the president's party holds in the congressional generic ballot, and it is at this point a deficit, the more seats the president should, therefore, lose. However, if he were, in fact, popular and Republicans were leading in the generic ballot, then you would think that they would gain more seats, but that's not the case. And the fourth, the president's party should lose seats in midterm elections even after controlling for other predictors. And they did do that. Now, but not in the Senate. And I guess that's why Donald Trump thinks that they were a huge success. Okay. Let's see. Table 1, and this is the part we're going to begin to skip, is there's no way for me to convey to you either what's in the table or to explain to you the statistics here, though it's very understandable if you're a statistical kind of person. We'll skip down now to the conclusions. Barring a dramatic shift. A dramatic shift. Ready? Music. Right there in the title, the song, the musical interlude there. It's not a song. Is titled Dramatic, so you had to use it. Barring a dramatic shift, we're going to bar it, so we shouldn't have played that. Barring that dramatic shift in the electoral landscape, i.e. Russians start voting, let's say, Democrats appear very likely to hold on to their majority in the House of Representatives in 2020 elections and make at least modest gains in the Senate. It wouldn't have to be a huge gain in order to gain control. However, there are significant caveats with both projections. The biggest one being, we don't know what's going to happen. But in more formal terms, obviously, one of those is that it is very early and that the president's approval rating and the generic ballot could very well be different late next summer, though probably not. I think that's what they're saying. In the House, we are in an era with limited ticket splitting and a weak incumbency advantage. Additionally, the overall House map has a Republican lean. Republicans could win the House back by defeating fewer than 2/3 of the 31 Democrats who hold seats that Trump carried in 2016. You see, although that's still relatively tall order, fewer than 2/3. I mean, 2/3 is a pretty significant chunk of that. So in the 31 seats now held by Democrats where Trump won that district in 2016, fewer than 2/3, so what's that, about 20 or so. If they can flip those back, then the House flips. Okay, well, it's a number. It's mathematically true. If they just happen to do that, what are the chances that they do it? Well, not so good. Anyway. So if they could win it back by defeating fewer than 2/3 of these 31 Democrats, and only 3 Republicans hold seats, by the way, that Hillary Clinton carried, so there's not much room for flipping there. The confluence of these factors could allow Republicans to overperform the projection in this model, particularly if Trump is reelected. While the model predicts a good chance of a Democratic majority in the Senate in 2021, and that's good news. Well, here's the bad part, I guess. The prediction should be taken with considerable caution, considering the margin of error of the model and the fact that only a handful of Republican seats that are up next year are in Democratic-leaning or swing states. Moreover, if Democrats do take back the Senate, it will almost certainly be by a very narrow margin, which would make it difficult to pass the sort of progressive legislation advocated by many of the party's 2020 presidential candidates. Okay, so worth keeping in mind, I suppose, and gives us an entree one of these days soon to talk about the competing modeling happening at CNU. All right, the other suggestion that Greg had, and I think it's a good one, let's head over to this piece, and then we'll pocket it so we can move it later on and share it with you. Let's see, comes from the Columbia Journalism Review, because some journalisms happened yesterday and now they're being reviewed. We're not alone. As it turns out, for the CJR, Maria Bustillos had a similar feeling about Chuck Todd kind of missing the point. And like I said, that was the one point at which I actually turned on the TV and saw live what was going on. I saw the Judiciary Committee hearing end, and then the panel O experts on NBC analyzing what they had allegedly what they had just seen, and Chuck Todd's amazing performance. It was quite a script in which he pointed out, on substance, the Democrats got everything they wanted, but they lost because optics. Not even sure what he meant to say by that, and I guess it wasn't really until the next day that I came to understand that what he meant was he didn't like the way Robert Mueller was careful in giving answers. And I mentioned that there's nuanced answers, and I think you all kind of get that. Like, for instance, the question of, the one thing upon which there was there were second thoughts from Mueller himself. And I guess the best illustration of it would be, for instance, the best illustration of the nuance, of course, is when people were asking, I noticed that you didn't charge, and we'll leave the president out of this one because that's a separate nuance that comes up later. You didn't charge this person or that person with any crimes, this or that other person connected with the Trump campaign. And a Republican would ask, isn't it the case that because you didn't charge them, they're not guilty of it? And the answer there is no, we don't know whether they're guilty or not. Only a court could answer that question. Only a trial could answer that question. We didn't initiate a courtroom trial for them, though, because the evidence was insufficient, we thought, to pretty much really to guarantee an outcome. Now, an outcome's never actually guaranteed, but an experienced prosecutor knows pretty well what level, what threshold of evidence really has to be met in order for a jury to convict. And the fact that they don't think that there's enough doesn't mean either that they think the person is innocent of the crime or, for that matter, guilty of the crime, but that the outcome is in too much doubt for them to bother wasting time on it. Republicans take that to mean, one, that they are innocent, and very, even more to the point, I guess, in the hearing context, they either are too stupid to understand this, and this can be the case for a lot of them, or they do understand it very well, but they are trying to take rhetorical advantage of other people being too stupid or distracted to be able to understand what's happening here. But they conflate not having sufficient evidence with there not being any evidence. And you saw it in the questioning of a couple of the Republicans. If you saw it live, you saw it then. If you saw it delayed on tape or in bits and pieces on the internet like I did, fine. But you would frequently see Republicans saying, you declined to bring charges against such and such a person because you said the evidence was insufficient. Is that correct? To which Mueller would say, correct. And isn't it in fact the case that no evidence exists that thus and such a person committed any crime? And Mueller would have to clarify for them, no, that isn't what I said. What I said was that the evidence was insufficient. But if it was insufficient and you didn't charge them, isn't it because you didn't think that they would be convicted of such a crime? Yes. Well, if you didn't think that they would be convicted of such a crime, isn't that in fact because they didn't commit it? No, that's not actually what I'm saying. But most people don't actually understand that, especially if they don't hear that exchange going. Exchange actually, ironically, when you have it, creates more danger that people who didn't understand it before will understand it afterwards if they can stay tuned into the exchange. But very frequently you did find people just jumping directly to the conclusion. Isn't it the case that there's no evidence of this? No. There was evidence. It just wasn't, in my view, sufficient to give us, say a 75% or better chance of success. I don't know what sort of metric Mueller uses or most prosecutors use, but essentially it comes down to something like that, perhaps expressed in different terms. Another example of that nuance, though, came from, for instance, Ted Lieu's questioning of Mueller. And as I recall, his angle was, and this was the one that it was so nuanced that even Mueller got himself crossed up and felt like he had to revise his answer. Liu was asking the question of, isn't it the case, essentially, that you were having declined to indict the president? It was a result of the Office of Legal Counsel memorandum opinion that a sitting president, isn't indictable. In other words, was it the case that the OLC memo convinced you that although the president had taken action that would otherwise, if it were any other person, would have resulted in an indictment, isn't it the case that you opted not to indict the president because of the existence of this memo? And the answer there is a tough one. It's a yes and no. And in fact, Mueller kind of screwed up the answer, although it was, it inured initially to Democratic benefit by saying, yeah, the reason I didn't charge the president is because of the existence of this OLC memo that says you can't, as a matter of DOJ policy anyway, indict a sitting president. When in fact, he corrected his answer later on to state, and I don't know if it's the better answer. I mean, I think it's a worse policy, but it's extremely nuanced. As I understood it, he was saying, well, it's not that I would have indicted him but for the memo. It's that because of the existence of the memo, I never bothered considering the question of whether to indict him. In other words, it's not that I said, well, first I'll analyze this as though the perpetrator wasn't the president, and then I'll apply the memo to my conclusion, i.e., if this were another person, I would indict him. But now what does this memo say? A sitting president can't be indicted. Is he a sitting president? Yes, no. This is how the flow chart works. If yes, then don't indict. If no, then indict. It worked in a different way. And he put it to Mueller. I don't know whether this is a good approach or not. Mueller put the flow chart together in a different way, where he basically said, is the person you're considering indicting exempt from indictment, or is the person you're investigating exempt from indictment under the OLC memo? If no, then proceed. If yes, then investigate, but don't, note to self, never ask yourself the question of whether you would actually indict this person because it's moot. That's what he was saying, and that's the correction that he had to make later. And that gave Republicans an opening, unfortunately, to conflate what the revision was about. And I think I did put this away in pocket. There's an exchange. Maybe I think I put the long form of it away. But there was there were two reporters, apparently, and I'm getting off track of the MSNBC's public editor's piece in the Columbia Journalism Review. But I'll get back to that in a second. But or maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should just use this to launch into this. There were two reporters. I guess Paula Reed is she from CBS, and Yamiche Alcindor, who said they both had exchanges with the president in which they directly quoted or asked about something that was said very clearly on television in front of everybody by Robert Mueller about Donald Trump, and Trump denied that it had been said, even though everyone watched it on television, his favorite medium and everything, and then accused the two reporters each individually of being horrible professionals and fake news. Let's see, Alcindor's exchange was, she tweets out about this one, this from yesterday. I quoted Robert Mueller directly to President Trump, and he replied that I was being untruthful in my question. He was totally wrong. Jordan Fabian chronicling that exchange on Twitter for The Hill, saying Trump to the great using her Twitter handle, Yamiche. When asked about Mueller's statement that Trump's written answers to the questions he submitted were, quote, generally untruthful, Trump responded, he didn't say that. When you ask that question, you're untruthful. And I don't know what to tell you. It's just bald-faced lying right in front of everybody. And the whole press corps knew it, but they'll be back for more today. That's just sort of the nature of the beast, I guess. The other exchange was Paula Reed, and she's got a much longer... is it a much longer? Oh, no, it's good. It's the short version of their exchange. Apparently, she also appeared this morning on CBS News to explain the whole thing, but they did like a 2-minute segment. So this one I can turn up the sound on. And this, too, a 23-second exchange. Might as well just let it speak for itself here.
No, he didn't say that. Again.
This is actually very unclear because of helicopter noise, I guess, which is a real problem. But so here's the transcript. It's Paula Reed asking, quote, Mueller said you could be criminally charged after leaving office. And Trump then denies that Mueller said this, says, no, he didn't. And then when I challenge him on the facts, calls me the worst. So, but for the helicopter noise, you would be able to hear all that much more clearly in this clip here.
No, he didn't say that. Again, you're fake news, and you're right at the top of the list also. Let me just tell you, go back to it's not what he said. Read his correction. Read his correction. If you read his correction, you'll find out. That's why people don't deal with you, because you're not an honest reporter.
All right, so that's a very, very hostile exchange, of course, and he won't be held to account for it in any way, shape, or form that I anticipate. But this whole exchange of read the correction. See, again, this is one of the more amazing things I think that came out of this. So Mueller did, in fact, say that he could be criminally charged after leaving office. And this was a huge surprise, apparently, to some Republicans. Is it Congressman Buck? Is that his last name? Who actually was asking the question, and it was... this is why they tell you in law school, don't ask questions you don't know the answer to. Now, everybody was supposed to know the answer to this one. It was very clear. It was laid out in the report, and Buck just, I guess, didn't read it. But Buck, I think, genuinely thought the answer to the question of could you charge the president with obstruction of justice if he, if he was impeached, then sure. But what if he loses the election in 2020 and is not the president? Come 2021, he's now not the president. He's a former president. Could Mueller or someone else pick up the investigative work and charge the president with obstruction of justice based on the same fact pattern? No new fact pattern. In other words, does it survive a statute of limitations? Does the fact that he's a former president enter into it? Anything like that? And the answer is just no. That's the answer. And Buck was genuinely surprised that was the answer. And there's this exchange. This one I don't have, unfortunately. And though I did see it this morning, so I could probably dig it up maybe during a break or certainly after the show and see if I can put it up there. If you haven't seen this one, he's asking, so you're saying, that the president could be charged after he leaves office? And Mueller's just point blank, matter of fact, yes. And Buck can't believe it. And he goes back and says, you're saying you could charge Donald Trump with this after his term of office? Yes. Like, what are you not understanding about this? And Buck is, I don't know. He's genuinely surprised. Now, there was also, as I mentioned, the Ted Lieu exchange where Ted Lieu says, well, isn't it the case that but for the OLC memo, you would have indicted him? And Mueller initially says yes, but then goes back later on to say, what I really should have said is not exactly, or at least, well, no, that's not the case. And what the case for me, in fact, was that I never contemplated the question of whether or not to indict Donald Trump because he is the president. This memo exists, and it always existed, during, certainly during the entirety of this investigation. We know about it, right? So we knew it was there. And so we knew that questions about, is this indictable, were a waste of time, and we bypassed them. And I mean, obviously they pondered them internally, but they never formally considered the question of whether or not they would be indicting him but for this memo, because that's how seriously they took the memo. Waste of time to ask this question. Moving on is basically how he considered it. So that was a clarification. That was that was the correction that was made. Donald Trump in this clip that I just played for you is either purposefully or because he's a dotard, is confusing the correction of the answer to Ted Lieu's question with a correction that didn't happen because it was never necessary and the answer was correct to Congressman Buck's question about whether or not he could be criminally charged. Now, granted, I guess a layperson, and we're not supposed to really consider the President of the United States a layperson with respect to not that complicated questions of law, but he is, because he's not particularly skilled in this and is just a very dumb person in general. So he's confused about the question of whether or not a sitting president can be indicted and the question of whether a person who is not a sitting president could be indicted. And I guess if you frame it that way, the choice is pretty stark, and it's amazing that he would confuse the two. But they do both have to do with indicting a person who at one point is president and then later is not president, and that person is him. And so I guess he's got motivation to try to wiggle out of this thing. But that's what makes this exchange so amazing. Read the correction, read the correction, read the correction. But the correction, sir, was of something entirely different. Though it did have to do with the question of whether or not you, Donald Trump, are a criminal or could be criminally indicted. And the answer in a year or two will be yes, but right now is apparently no. That part of it might be confusing, but the idea that you can stand there and say, you're the one, you're the worst, you're the right at the top of the list, you're the enemy of the people because you're getting this wrong, while you're getting it wrong, is pretty astounding, except no one's astounded by this stuff from Donald Trump anymore. Okay. Jumping back now to where we launched this from, Maria Bustillos, writing in the Columbia Journalism Review, MSNBC public editor, The Chuck Todd Show is the headline of the piece for some reason. After former special counsel Robert Mueller testified before the House Judiciary Committee this morning, Chuck Todd, this would be yesterday, of course, managed to demonstrate with uncharacteristic brevity his basic misunderstanding of the requirements of his job. And it quotes here his tweet on the subject. I have been going off of his live comments on the subject. His tweet says, on substance, Democrats got what they wanted, that Mueller didn't charge President Trump because of the OLC guidance, that he could be indicted after he leaves office, among other things. But on optics, this was a disaster. And no one knows why he really feels that way. Todd's focus on the entertainment aspect of politics coverage is often in evidence. For example, in his own recent performance as moderator in the Democratic presidential debate, he managed to talk more than all but three of the candidates, even as he demanded that they keep their own answers brief. That was pretty amazing. For Chuck Todd, all the political world's a stage, and he's the star. And it's not just Todd. Other MSNBC anchors reacted to the Mueller hearing similarly, finding fault with the Democrats and Mueller's lack of pizzazz as performers. Brian Williams referred to the caffeine gap in the Judiciary Committee's questioning. I can't help pointing out that excessive concern with caffeinated pizzazz can warp a journalist's judgment pretty severely and is best avoided. I think that's probably pretty good advice. And I did see somebody succinctly summarizing this by saying, yes, sure, you demonstrated the president's complicity and participation in numerous crimes. against the Constitution and the country, but could you do it with jazz hands? That would be a lot easier to understand. So if you could just do us that favor. Anyway, at a moment of particular gravity for the country, with the sitting president credibly accused of obstructing justice and many of his campaign staff and associates under investigation and indictment, may I suggest that if you, a journalist, are bored with the politics of this, if you're demanding somehow to be entertained right now, you're not doing your job. And I think that's a pretty good summation of it. There's a little bit more to it, but I think you get the idea, and we'll be back with more ideas after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio, into our final segment. I guess I'll just finish up then. There's some nice remarks here at the end of the CJR piece here. So we left off by reminding everybody that, this is not supposed to be about entertainment. Politics isn't entertainment. It is not a performance to be critiqued. Reporting on national politics is a public trust of solemn importance that affects hundreds of millions of people. It took a former U.S. attorney and acting head of the DEA, Chuck Rosenberg, to drag MSNBC back to reality after Williams's remarks. There is a difference between exciting and important, he said. There are things that are exciting that are not important, and there are things that are important that are not particularly exciting. Perfectly said, exclaimed Nicole Wallace, and it's so important. I think it's shallow analysis, I'm guilty of it, to hone in on the performance aspects of it. I, Maria Bustillos, couldn't agree more. And, it's well put, although it wasn't very exciting, I'll say that. And so, therefore, we can dismiss it all out of hand. How about that? We can move on to other subjects, and let's see. There are a number of other directions that we could go and ought to go, and lots of things to get to, and I don't know. Let's do this one quick one here just for a second, because it seems somewhat interesting and weird and somehow creepy, and I'd love to get to the bottom of it one day, though it's more exciting than important. I think the Washington Post reported on this one. How did Trump end up in front of a presidential seal doctored to include a Russian symbol? That is a good question. When the president spent part of his day lying his ass off to Turning Point USA the other day, his speech during which he let us know that he has an Article 2, and it means he can do whatever he wants as president. Apparently, he was up on stage, and I guess nobody noticed it at the time. Well, I guess they did. They just didn't make a big fuss out of it at the time. He's speaking in front of there's a large screen behind him, as there often is on one of these stages. And what was projected up on the screen behind him looked, to the casual observer, I guess, pretty close to the seal of the President of the United States, which is exactly what you might expect to see up behind the President of the United States when he's giving a speech. However, some sharp eyes, I guess being forced to stare at it for long enough, were able to pick up on a few things and say, there's something weird about the way the seal works. It looks somehow different than it should. It's clearly designed to be a play on this, but it's not the right seal. And what do we mean? Michael Bryce Sadler and Reese Thibault, I don't know how he pronounces this one, put this piece together. Now, let me just read it to you here. At first glance, There was nothing unusual about President Trump's introduction Tuesday at Turning Point USA's Student Summit. In many ways, it mirrored the production style that has become synonymous with Trump's campaign rallies. And maybe this is the reason that he does the rallies the way he does. Ordinarily, for whatever reason, Trump has a great affinity for backdrops of Trump supporters in risers and waving signs and wearing MAGA hats. Which is unusual. That's not ordinarily how they set things up. Though it's not out of the question. I've seen other presidents use it, but this is his generalized format. But this time, he was just up on stage, and they had a projected picture behind him. And I guess it just creates opportunities for mischief, because here's what happened. Following a 12-minute video illustrating Trump's rise to the presidency, music blared as the president's name flashed across a giant screen in a bold shade of red. Trump took the stage and soaked in the raucous cheers from hundreds of young supporters packed inside the Marriott Marquis in Washington. Charlie Kirk, Turning Point's outspoken founder and executive director, and he's like 12 years old, and has been pictured wearing diapers, and I'm not kidding, was on his left. But the image on the screen to Trump's right, captured in dozens of photos and videos from the event, is less familiar. The image almost resembles the official seal of the president, but a closer examination reveals alterations that seem to poke fun at the president's golfing penchant and accusations that he has ties to Russia. Neither the White House nor Turning Point knows how it got there or who created it. They know, of course, how it got there. It was projected there. They know who was the projectionist. They just don't know who gave the projectionist this file and why. It's just very interesting. So they have a side-by-side of the seal that was used and of the Russian symbol that it bears some strange resemblance to. And then they have a video in which they illustrate by highlighting the various places where the seal that was used departs from the standard, the actual real seal. All right. I can't show you those things, so I'm just going to have to read you their description of what's going on. The eagle in the seal, and you know the presidential seal, the eagle, bald eagle, has that stars and stripes shield across its breast and has clutching in the two claws. The two in the talons of the eagle are, I guess, like an olive branch in one and arrows, usually in the other, representing, I guess, both the power of the presidency to wage war and the ability to extend the olive branch and seek peace, etc. You know the symbolism. Now, the weird part is this. The eagle in the seal that was used yesterday has 2 heads. Okay, that is interesting. 2 heads instead of 1. Now, why is that interesting beyond the fact that eagles typically have 1 head? And the answer, of course, is that a 2-headed eagle is very frequently used, most often in European, I guess, heraldry, really, but in national symbols. It is a symbol historically tied to empire and dominance, European style. It closely resembles the bird on the Russian coat of arms and also appears on the flags of Serbia, Albania, and Montenegro. And I don't think anyone was really intending to intimate that the president had ties to Serbia, Albania, or Montenegro. I think they had Russia in mind. Now, its left talons, rather than clasping 13 arrows, appear instead to clutch a set of golf clubs, which, could have been a friendly joke among the attendees there. But the 2-headed thing, what is that about? One Washington Post reader noted a website that sells merchandise featuring what appears to be the same fake seal. In those images, the words on the parody eagle's banner say 45 es un títere, which in Spanish translates to 45 is a puppet. On the official presidential seal, of course, it doesn't say that. The eagle's mouth holds a banner with the U.S. motto, e pluribus unum, out of many one. The fake seal on the shop's merchandise shows the eagle clutching cash in its right talons. The Post reached out on the Twitter and Facebook accounts associated with the web retailer, One Term Donnie, but has not received a reply. That would be interesting and exciting, but not important, right? A projection of the true presidential seal was centered behind Trump's name as he walked on stage. The true seal was also on the lectern where the president spoke for 80 minutes. A White House spokesman told the Post they did not see the fake seal before it appeared on screen and referred questions about the incident to Turning Point. In a phone interview Wednesday, a spokesman for the conservative group said he didn't know where the altered seal came from or how it ended up on screen behind the president. He said the mistake probably came from the team that handled the event's audio and visual production. It was a last-minute AV mistake, and I can't figure out where the breakdown was, but it was a last-minute throw-up, which I don't think means exactly what it sounds like. But that's all it was, he says, and I can't figure out who did it yet. It may have been someone inside of Turning Point who provided the file, or they may simply have said to the AV team at the hotel, yeah, at this point I want you to grab the presidential seal and put that up, and they just figured, what are the odds that they'll grab a different seal either intentionally or accidentally, right? I don't know where they got the image from, he added. According to Turning Point, the audiovisual team helped create and coordinate the graphics, images, and videos displayed at Tuesday's event, including the official seal shown behind the president's flashing name on the screen. Turning Point spokesman said the team was made up of staff from his organization and from the hotel. On Wednesday evening, he was still working to determine who exactly was responsible. There's probably a little bit more, there is a little bit more to the rest of the story, but I think that you got the point here. The projection appeared to be a practical joke, one likely to embarrass a particularly image-conscious president, according to Richard Painter, White House ethics lawyer under George W. Bush. I don't really know why they felt like they had to ask him that question, but they did. There's, of course, more coverage of how much money he spends on his golf outings, but the main gist of the story is somebody did something on purpose that they thought was hilarious, and I guess it actually kind of was, so kudos to you. Just sort of a weird story. I thought I'd make you aware of it. Now, we have other items to bring to your attention here. I'm going to flip back to Pocket and review a few things. I don't know which direction to go in here. Let's try this one because I think it might be just a little bit shorter. But again, changing directions entirely here for just a moment. Back to the first comment on the show, back to Jeffrey Epstein, of all places, even the day after the Mueller hearings, because, of course, they were a disaster, right? Okay. So I've got a piece here from Virginia Heffernan running in, is it Wired? Yeah, Wired magazine, of all places. But this taking us back to the Jeffrey Epstein topic, but a one-off here, but an important one, I think, just in following the Epstein trajectory, and one that may finally lead us back to the connection we were always expecting, both to Donald Trump and probably a couple of other politicians as well. Ready for this one? Virginia Heffernan again, page 88 on Twitter. That's the handle. Don't look for the 88th page of Twitter. That's not the way it works. The twisted flight paths of Global Girl and the Lolita Express. That's the title of the piece. Again, Wired magazine, dated the 23rd of this month. Model turned pilot, and there are a couple of them in the Epstein tale, but this one, model turned pilot Nadia Marchenko, an alleged accomplice of Jeffrey Epstein, is among a group of girls who came to the Epstein syndicate, presumably by plane, from abroad. And now the body of the story here with a picture of Nadia Marchenko, along with another model from the Epstein orbit, Zuzana Gregorova. A lot of Eastern European bent to their import business, just like Donald Trump and his modeling agency. Isn't that weird? The Gulfstream girl can't use that nickname anymore. In 2013, the model turned pilot, then 27, blonde, often beaming in photos, was hit with a trademark infringement suit by Gulfstream Aerospace, which told her its brand name was off limits. That must have been a disappointment. As a commercial pilot, the former Gulfstream girl, whose real name is Nadia Marcinko, I'm guessing at the pronunciation there, by the way, it is Marcinko, Marcinko. And before that, I guess her real name, she changed it for whatever reason, was Nadia Marcinkova. Well, probably Marcinkova would be a better pronunciation of that one. Well, she holds 3 rating certificates for single-engine aircraft, multi-engine aircraft, and various Gulfstream business jets, which have their own rating certificates. Furthermore, she is the CEO of Aviloop, I'm not certain what, I guess Aviation Loop, Aviloop, a supremely odd aviation branding business whose website features flawless shots of her with Gulfstreams. Marcinko was a good sport about losing her old handle. In the Miami Herald last year, Julie Brown, yes, the one behind all the Epstein reporting, reported that Marcinko was brought, that's in quotes, brought to the U.S. from the former Yugoslavia to live with an abusive man more than 30 years her senior when she was 15. It's not hard to imagine she's adept at survival. Moreover, as an aerobatic pilot, she's stylish and dashing. In a video from March 2018, taken down just last week, she flips a Pitts S2B and then eats a donut hanging from a ribbon while upside down in the cockpit. In materials for Aviloop, she now calls herself Global Girl rather than Gulfstream Girl. Okay. Marcinko's shifting sobriquets bring to mind the opening to Vladimir Nabokov's novel of child rape. She was low, plain low in the morning. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted line. But in my arms, she was always Lolita. Which makes sense, as the airplane that would later help shape Marcinko's life in America, a large cabin Boeing 727, now associated with both high glamour and incomprehensible suffering, was known as the Lolita Express. It belonged to Jeffrey Epstein. Virginia getting very flowery with this one. Nadia Marcinkova, by that name, first appeared in court documents in Florida about a decade ago. She was 22 then and had been in the U.S. since 2000. She's one of the most prominent immigrants in the circle of Epstein, the accused child rapist and registered sex offender who was arrested on sex trafficking charges at Teterboro Airport on July 6th. He has pleaded not guilty, she notes parenthetically, unlike the hundreds of young girls who, according to testimony in court documents, were lured by Epstein and his surrogates to his mansions from Florida trailer parks, Manhattan high schools, and Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, by the way. Marcinko belonged to a smaller group who came to the Epstein syndicate, presumably by plane, from abroad. An attorney who represented Epstein's alleged victims described Nadia Marcinkova as, quote, Epstein's live-in sex slave, unquote, in a Florida court filing. Several girls told the Palm Beach police that later in the aughts, Marcinko pressured them to have sex with both her and Epstein. Through the years, Epstein has maintained a fleet of aircraft that has included a Gulfstream 4, a Gulfstream GVSP, a helicopter, and the larger Boeing Lolita Express, which seated nearly 200 people. In the aughts, when Epstein logged some 600 hours of flight time per year, New York Magazine reported that he flew so much because he was scouting, quote, investment opportunities. Before he landed in jail this month, Epstein's private jets were still crisscrossing the planets about every third day. An employee at an airstrip in St. Thomas, close to Epstein's 70-acre property in the Virgin Islands, which is nicknamed Pedophile Island, let's see. Oh, we've lost the stream of the sentence here with all these additional clauses. An employee, though, told Holly Aguirre of Vanity Fair that Epstein could often be seen getting out of his helicopter and boarding his jet with children, female children. That's the quote that she gave. The employees expressed disbelief and disgust that Epstein, a convicted sex offender, could move around so easily. Though Epstein exploits an obscure federal policy that lets private owners hide their movements from the public record, the manifests from hundreds of flights are available, and they clearly show the names of the celebrities, from Alan Dershowitz to Bill Clinton, linked to Epstein. Marchenko's flights are somewhat harder to pin down, as girls in Epstein's circle were often recorded only by first names or initials. Why is that even possible? I've never been entirely clear on what the law is with respect to filling out these manifests. Like, if you're doing this, why don't you just not fill out manifests? And if it's legally required that you fill out manifests, why isn't it legally required when you are filling out manifests to put down the names of people you're trafficking sexually as well? I mean, I'm sure that's not written into the law as an exception, right? Anyway, so Marchenko's flights are harder to pin down, as the girls in Epstein circles were often recorded only by first names or initials. The name Nadia appears in 2003, and Nadia Marchenko appears on a manifest for a flight out of Palm Beach in 2004. Then NM starts to show up on nearly every manifest for both one of the Gulfstreams and the Lolita Express. While NM was generally noted zipping among airports in Palm Beach, Florida, Monterey, California, and New York, she also visited Columbus, Ohio, Newfoundland, and Terceira Island in the Azores. A pilot for Epstein testified that Marchenko had flown with Epstein hundreds of times. The available manifests record no flight of NM to Bratislava or anywhere in Slovakia, which Marchenko told a plane enthusiast magazine was her home country. And because the manifests from 2000 are not available, it's still not clear whether she left home in an Epstein plane. On March 22, 2019, though, Epstein's Gulfstream GVSP flew from Paris to Bratislava and returned 5 hours later. Marchenko is one of 4 named alleged accomplices of Epstein who were given immunity from prosecution in 2008. That was the year that Epstein was convicted on 1 count of solicitation and another of procuring a girl under 18 for prostitution, which of course is not an actual possibility, as has been discussed in the past. It's just child abduction. For this, of course, he was given a nauseatingly light sentence with extensive work release, during which, as the lawyer for several of Epstein's victims alleged this week, he continued to have improper sexual contact with young women. The lax sentence and the immunities were part of the deal Epstein got from Alex Acosta, who was then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida and was, until July 19th, Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor. Acosta resigned the post amid a furor over his leniency with Epstein. After Epstein was arrested this month, federal prosecutors further alleged that Epstein paid 2 people whom investigators identified as co-conspirators hundreds of thousands of dollars in 2008, seemingly to keep them quiet. The cash recipients weren't named, but it's not unreasonable to infer that one of them could be Marchenko. According to the co-conspirators who were given immunity back then and who might have been paid off by Epstein, among them is Sarah Kellen, a regular on Epstein's flights who was accused by lawyers in court filings of, quote, bringing girls to Epstein's mansion to be abused, unquote. Leslie Groff is another co-conspirator, an alleged sex scheduler in Epstein's ring who is said to have coordinated, quote, travel with young girls. With a sex trafficking case, neutral language can become sinister. For instance, there sure is a lot of ominous bringing in this story, with girls as the verb's direct objects. is bringing, when it comes to unaccompanied minors, also kidnapping, trafficking, or even enslaving? Was the travel Groff reportedly coordinated international to the U.S., maybe on commercial flights? Was it consensual? Federal prosecutors untangling the Epstein web are going to have a lot of flight paths to study, and perhaps one day we'll see a map of a modern-day slave trade connecting points east and south like Slovakia and Ecuador with Palm Beach, New York City, and perhaps some of Epstein's other hangouts and redoubts, including Columbus, Ohio, and New Mexico. Finally, among the alleged co-conspirators, there's another immigrant, Adriana Ross, a.k.a. Adriana, or Adriana Muczynska, a former model from Poland, whom Epstein supposedly hired in 2002 to set up what the court documents refer to as, quote, sex sessions, unquote, in Florida. It's not clear whether Epstein and his recruiters first encountered Ross in the U.S. or Poland, but according to flight logs, Ross is one of the people in Epstein's circle who flew most frequently with Bill Clinton. She also appeared by Epstein's side in Manhattan at a magazine launch party in 2005. Ross refused to answer questions about Epstein in 2010. As far as Marchenko goes, that chapter in her life, her teens and early 20s when she was rolling with Ross, Kellen, and Groff, seemed long past. According to the Washington Post, she's not taking calls from reporters. For this story, I tried to reach her through LinkedIn, YouTube, and other social media, as well as through a few of her friends. I heard nothing back. Her LinkedIn resume no longer mentions her work for Epstein's outfit. In one deposition, she declined to answer questions. Nadia now uses Marchenko, a revision of the name in the 2008 indictment. So, she's the elusive global girl in the skies, and Nadia Marchenko here on Earth. On Earth, she was and may still be ensconced in an office in a posh building at 301 East 66th Street, not far from Epstein's House of Horrors at 9 East 71st, where the FBI, after Epstein's arrest on sex trafficking charges, found child porn, piles of cash, a fake passport that claimed Epstein lived in Saudi Arabia, and God knows what else. As I understand it, there were also some loose diamonds as well, interestingly enough. The company of Mark Epstein, Jeffrey's brother, owns a majority stake in the building on 66th Street, including the unit Marchenko apparently lived or lives in. Mark says he has never heard of Ava Loop, which was registered at that building for at least 7 years. As recently as 2015, Sarah Kellen took deliveries at the same building. So, in spite of the immunity and the name changes, maybe Marchenko is not as far out of the gravitational pull of Epstein's world as she might want to be, especially with Epstein back in the news. Marchenko's story is her own, though, and with Epstein facing new charges, her testimony could be invaluable. After all, among the numberless women and girls who have come forward saying they were raped and enslaved by Epstein and his syndicate, she and the other alleged co-conspirators could belong to a subset who may have started out as victims and ended up as possible abusers. Victims have testified that Marchenko was central to Epstein's recruitment strategies and often joined in the abuse. Her story also suggests a possible connection between the indentured girls who say they were brutalized by the Epstein syndicate and a part of the global transportation infrastructure of human trafficking. If Epstein's arrest really does lead to a sustained effort to break the back of international sex slave trade, governments should monitor more closely the use of Gulfstreams and Boeings to oligarchs and their cutouts. They are also going to have to crack down on planes full of human, quote, cargo, complicit private airports, and the extensive brutality, inhumanity, and complicity of some in this corporate jet set. There is, of course, considerably more to this story, or actually not that much more now that I look at it very quickly, but it's time for us to close things out. But a good point there to end with. There's a major part of this story hidden in the genteel world of general aviation, where rich people bypass, by virtue of having their own private planes or having access to other people's private planes, bypass almost all of the security and observational safeguards that go along with travel internationally or domestically for the rest of us. Just sort of an interesting point. Good question. The connection to aviation, both good vertical integration and a weirdly common thread among the stories of a lot of abusers. By the way, just before closing things out here, I'll note for the record that way back when I told you the story of the underage girl who ended up serving vodka in nothing but body paint at a Trump vodka Super Bowl party back in, 2008. Later on, after leaving the quote-unquote modeling trade, ended up in aviation as her chosen profession. She ran a very apparently exclusive business catering and providing flight attendants for private aviation, probably among that same circle. Very interesting sideline for them to move into. Aviation, moving around internationally without detection.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waltman.
All right, time now for Justice Putnam's program, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Got a couple of stories that can cram in here. U.S. Representative Kelly Armstrong of North Dakota tried playing the Peter Strzok card with Mueller. It didn't go well for him. We'll see about how that one worked after this, when Justice brings you his program coming up next.